The early 20th century saw an increasingly interconnected globe beset by rivalry among empires, new technologies that transformed warfare, and a shifting balance of power on multiple continents. Old alliances locked horns over territory and influence. By 1914, Europe had spiraled into a cataclysm, with the Central Powers, led by Germany and Austria-Hungary, pitted against the Allied powers of France, Britain, Russia, and eventually Italy. America watched from across the Atlantic, torn between isolationist instincts and a growing sense that neutrality might be impossible in a world turned upside down. Then came the German U-boat attacks, the sinking of the Lusitania, and the Zimmermann telegram, which hinted at German overtures to Mexico to attack the United States. Public sentiment shifted. President Woodrow Wilson brought America into the war in 1917. Into this maelstrom stepped John J. Pershing, who had already spent decades forging a reputation as a disciplined, no-nonsense officer. When the call came to form and lead the American Expeditionary Forces, AEF, in Europe, Pershing was ready, and history would never be quite the same. He was born on September 13, 1860, in a small town called Laclede in northern Missouri. The world into which John Joseph Pershing arrived was one still reeling from the shadows of the Civil War. His family's roots were modest. His father ran a general store, and the demands of daily life were shaped by the rhythms of rural America. Young John was bright and inquisitive, but also known for a certain stoic determination even as a child. One anecdote from neighbors recalled that the boy willingly walked miles through Missouri's punishing winters just to reach a small one-room schoolhouse. Perhaps it was the rigors of that farmland environment that hardened him, preparing him for the challenges that lay ahead. Or perhaps he was born with that intangible quality, call it discipline, call it willpower, that would later define his career. When Pershing was still in his teens, he taught at a local school for African American children, an experience that shaped his views on leadership and social justice. Later, he attended the State Normal School, now Truman State University, and eventually secured an appointment to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Arriving there in 1882, he was a serious young man, not the most dazzling student academically, but someone the upperclassmen respected for his composure. Already he showed a flair for leadership. Some classmates remembered him as quiet but firm, always ready to stand up for those on the receiving end of hazing rituals. He graduated in 1886, ranking 30th in a class of 77. Though not top of his class, he had already begun forging a reputation that would one day overshadow any numerical ranking. His earliest assignments brought him to the frontier environment of the American West. He served with the 6th Cavalry, patrolling areas where tension still simmered between settlers and Native American tribes. This period taught him crucial lessons in adaptability, how to manage limited resources, keep men in high spirits despite harsh conditions, and handle the delicate interplay between force and diplomacy. In 1891, he returned to West Point as an instructor in tactics. There, he gained the moniker Blackjack, a nickname rumored to have originated from his time leading African American troops in the 10th Cavalry Regiment. Though some accounts say it was originally a slur used by cadets who disliked his stern discipline, Pershing, unshaken, embraced the name. It would stick to him for the rest of his life. The Spanish-American War in 1898 marked Pershing's first real taste of combat on a global stage. Though overshadowed by figures like Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders, Pershing's role in the Cuban campaign earned him notice from the Army's top brass. He led African-American Buffalo soldiers with distinction, showing coolness under fire. But it was in the aftermath in the Philippine insurrection that Pershing found deeper challenges. Tasked with quelling insurgencies among the Moro tribes in the southern Philippines, he navigated a complex mix of tribal politics, colonial policy, and often brutal combat in dense jungles. Here, Pershing's methods sparked controversy. While some lauded him for forging alliances with moderate Moro leaders and introducing modernization measures like improved roads and education, others pointed to harsh punitive expeditions that exacted a high human cost among local populations. Still, the campaigns propelled him up the Army's ranks. By the time the United States edged toward involvement in World War I, he had earned a reputation as the officer best suited to handle large-scale, intricate operations overseas. Yet his life was more than campaigns and promotions. In 1905, he married Helen Frances Warren, daughter of a U.S. Senator. Whether that meant dabbling in unusual scales, shifting tempos mid-song, or even writing acoustic intros that exploded into monstrous thrash motifs. From the outset, Cliff contributed a new level of musical sophistication that shaped Metallica's earliest releases. In 1983, they recorded Kill 'Em All. Although Dave Mustaine was out of the band by then, replaced by Kirk Hammett, Cliff's influence is evident. His bass solo, Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth, became one of the album's defining tracks, a bizarre, mesmerizing piece that fused classical arpeggios with ear-splitting distortion. Live audiences were often stunned silent by that solo, then exploded into cheers as the rest of the band joined in. This was Cliff's official calling card, a musician who combined raw power with an almost avant-garde flair. He wasn't content just to keep the rhythm. He wanted to sing through the bass, to make it wail and moan and cry out. He'd sometimes say, "The bass is an orchestra in your hands. You just have to know how to play all the parts." Personal stories from this era paint Cliff as the most laid-back member of the band, yet also the one most stubbornly committed to his principles. He'd roam around wearing bell-bottom jeans in an era of tight spandex pants, smoke cigarettes with a thoughtful look in his eye, and usually end a debate with a shrug and a softly spoken comment that cut right to the heart of the matter. He wasn't easily rattled. While James and Lars were known for their fiery arguments, Cliff was the calm center, offering well-reasoned perspectives or simply rolling his eyes when things got ridiculous. Though fans might imagine thrash metal icons partying nonstop, Cliff had a certain restraint. He'd drink and have fun, but he never let the party overshadow the music. Fellow musicians describe him as fiercely disciplined, always warming up before shows, often lost in his own realm of inventive bass lines. Yet he was also the one quick to help a friend in need, a trait that made him beloved by local fans and roadies alike. In 1984, Metallica released Ride the Lightning, which expanded their horizons even further. Cliff's imprint on songs like For Whom the Bell Tolls and the haunting instrumental The Call of Cthulhu was undeniable. The intros, the middle sections, they radiated Cliff's sense of composition, heavy yet nuanced. For Whom the Bell Tolls opens with that iconic bass riff that most first-time listeners mistake for a guitar. Watching him play it live was a revelation. He'd sometimes tilt the bass upward, lost in the swirling distortion, as though conjuring an entire storm from just 4 strings. Many fans consider the album's dynamic blend of thrash aggression and melodic complexity to be a reflection of Cliff's influence. He was the one pushing the band to incorporate layered harmonies, thoughtful interludes, and even literary references in their lyrics. Yet with greater exposure came more relentless touring. By this point, Metallica was building a reputation as an untamed force on stage. They'd open for bigger acts and often upstage them, rousing the crowd with breakneck tempos and ferocious stage presence. Cliff was never the most hyperactive member on stage. He didn't dash around like a maniac, but he didn't need to. His hair, that wild lion's mane, whipped in circles as he hammered the bass with uncanny precision. And when he stepped up for a solo, the crowd's eyes zeroed in on him, transfixed. Band members used to joke that he'd even go into a meditative state mid-show, locked in his zone. He never tried to hog the spotlight, but it found him anyway. The next album, Master of Puppets, 1986, cemented Metallica's place in metal history. It also showcased Cliff's artistry in ways that still move fans to tears, knowing it was his last full contribution before his death. The complexity, the raw heaviness, the melodic interludes, and the philosophical bent of the lyrics all carried Cliff's fingerprints. At times, the band used acoustic guitars and layered harmonies that soared over thunderous rhythms. Cliff's bass lines became a force of nature, weaving in and out of the guitar riffs. The title track, Master of Puppets, with its intricate midsection, stands as an enduring testament to the band's willingness to defy the simplistic stereotypes often pinned on metal. During that midsection, Cliff's sensitivity to melody and dynamics signaled that thrash could be more than just speed for speed's sake. It could be art, it could be epic, it could be meaningful. But as Master of Puppets launched Metallica into a new level of fame, the band found themselves in a whirlwind of publicity, press appearances, and near-constant touring. The album was a critical and commercial success, bringing them out of the underground circles and placing them firmly in the mainstream eye. James, Lars, Kirk, and Cliff found themselves playing to bigger crowds in Europe. In my dreams, I speak to them, and I hope they understand. The letter was tucked away in family archives and rarely disclosed publicly, but it offers a glimpse into the weight Pershing carried. For a man who had lost nearly all of his immediate family, the sorrow of commanding countless men to risk their lives was a daily burden. After the war, Pershing was made general of the Armies, a rank higher than any American officer had yet held, though the formalities around that title were somewhat ambiguous until later. In the public eye, he was the face of American success overseas. Politicians courted him for potential presidential runs. The press lauded him as the father of the modern U.S. Army. He authored memoirs and gave speeches championing a professional military structure that might prevent the kind of unpreparedness he believed had hampered American efforts at the start of the war. He also advocated for a strong transatlantic relationship, warning that the seeds of future conflicts lurked in Europe's unresolved grievances. In 1921, he was appointed Army Chief of Staff, where he devoted himself to reorganizing the Army along more modern lines, including better training, advanced tactics, and an emphasis on combined arms. Some said he was grooming the next generation of officers who would go on to lead America in World War II. Names like Dwight D. Eisenhower, George S. Patton, Omar Bradley, and others who served under or around Pershing in some capacity. His personal life remained relatively quiet. He never remarried. Those close to him suggested he could not bear to replace the family he'd lost. His surviving son, Francis, often recalled his father as caring but somewhat distant, a man whose sense of loss had carved out a hollow that no victory parade could fill. Still, Pershing involved himself in charities supporting war veterans and families, perhaps in an effort to ease the suffering he knew all too well. When the Great Depression gripped the nation in the 1930s, Pershing helped organize relief efforts for former soldiers, though the bonus Army fiasco of 1932, where veterans marched on Washington demanding early payment of service certificates, put the Army leadership in a difficult position. Pershing privately criticized the harsh response that ended in violence, but avoided public rebuke of his successors, feeling that the Army's unity should not be undermined by internal bickering. Controversies naturally sprang up around his legacy. Some argued his refusal to let American troops be placed directly under French or British command caused unnecessary friction early in the war. Others criticized his tactical approach, particularly during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, claiming he too eagerly employed frontal assaults reminiscent of earlier battles, thereby incurring higher casualties. Pershing's defenders countered that the Allies needed a bold push to break the stalemate, and that no new weapons or tactics could fully negate the brutality of trench warfare. On matters of race, too, his record is complex. He championed the capabilities of African American soldiers and officers, though the Army itself remained segregated, and the 369th Infantry Regiment, known as the Harlem Hellfighters, fought under French command, partly due to the prejudices of the time. Pershing did not overturn these institutional biases, but neither did he share the racist views that sidelined so many black soldiers from frontline service. The moral landscape of his career, like so many leaders of the era, was riddled with ambiguities and compromises. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Pershing's influence on American military thinking remained strong. His emphasis on rigorous training, combined arms cooperation, and integrated logistical support foreshadowed the large-scale mobilizations seen in World War II. Many historians note that the successes of D-Day and the subsequent campaigns against Nazi Germany built on foundations Pershing had laid, particularly in terms of forging an expeditionary mindset in the Army. Yet by the time the Second Global War erupted in 1939, Pershing was in his late 70s, too old for active command. Still, he advised top generals and occasionally offered public statements encouraging national unity. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, he recognized the vast scope of the struggle ahead, but also believed wholeheartedly that the professionalized army he had helped create would rise to the challenge. One lesser-known fact is that, in 1937, Pershing traveled incognito to several European capitals, including Berlin, to gauge the political climate. Although it wasn't an officially sanctioned mission, certain American diplomats quietly encouraged him to see whether Adolf Hitler's Germany posed the threat many feared. Pershing, noting the fervor of German nationalism and the rearmament he observed, wrote a private memorandum to a contact in the State Department, warning that war was likely inevitable unless diplomatic efforts found a miraculous resolution. That memorandum remained classified for decades, only emerging in the mid-1970s, providing yet another example of Pershing's foresight. As he aged, memories of the Great War haunted him. He spoke occasionally of men who died under his command, sometimes referencing specific regiments or even specific names. According to a nurse who cared for him later in life, he would awaken at night calling out orders as if still in the trenches. Yet publicly, he remained the dignified general, the man whose unwavering leadership had brought American might to bear on a foreign battlefield. In 1948, he attended the dedication of the American cemetery at Suresnes near Paris, walking among the white crosses that marked the graves of so many AEF soldiers. Observers said he moved slowly, pausing at random headstones, resting a trembling hand upon each one before moving on. It was as if he were paying a personal farewell to ghosts he had known. John J. Pershing died on July 15, 1948, at Walter Reed General Hospital in Washington, D.C. The tributes that poured in from around the world acknowledged him as one of the era's most consequential military figures. Yet the complexities of his achievements and his personal losses ensure his story remains more than a mere heroic saga. Indeed, he symbolizes a transitional period for the United States when the nation moved from a relatively modest standing army to a modern superpower capable of decisive intervention overseas. His leadership in World War I also laid the groundwork for the role America would play in shaping the international order thereafter, whether through the League of Nations or the later creation of the United Nations following World War II. In that sense, he stands at the crossroads of American military tradition and the new era of global leadership that emerged in the 20th century. To this day, debates continue about whether Pershing's approach to warfare was too rigid or exactly what was required to break the deadlock on the Western Front. Some critics argue that he failed to fully incorporate emerging tactics like infiltration or decentralized command that were being explored by German stormtroopers and certain Allied units. Others contend that his broader vision, an independent American army fighting as a cohesive force, was crucial in shifting the balance and hastening the war's conclusion. Pershing's record in the Philippines and with the Moro campaigns is equally fraught. He proved adept at negotiation and assimilation efforts, yet also oversaw brutal engagements. These moral ambiguities reflect the challenges faced by any officer navigating the complexities of colonial warfare at the time. For older audiences who lived through the mid-20th century or whose parents did, Pershing remains a figure who straddles the transition from horse-mounted cavalry to tanks and airplanes. For younger generations, he is sometimes a forgotten name, overshadowed by later figures like George Marshall or Dwight Eisenhower. Yet if you stand at the American cemeteries in France or read the diaries of those who fought in the AEF, Pershing's presence is indelibly stamped on the soul of that war. The strategies he employed, the discipline he enforced, and the ultimate success in pushing the German lines shaped the narrative that the United States could indeed wage war on foreign soil successfully. And so we come to the final reflections. What does Pershing's story teach us about duty and leadership? He was a man who experienced personal tragedy on a scale few can imagine, the loss of nearly his entire immediate family, and turned that grief into unshakable resolve. He was a commander who bore responsibility for hundreds of thousands of American soldiers in some of the most horrific battles of the 20th century. He navigated alliances with foreign generals who initially doubted American competence, yet he never surrendered the principle that the U.S. Army must fight under its own banner. There is a clear lesson here. Leadership often means standing firm on core convictions, even amid immense pressure to conform or compromise. Another lesson emerges from his complexities. The moral burdens of warfare rarely yield simple answers, and a leader who shoulders them must live with the haunting knowledge of lives lost and futures altered. Reflecting on the sum of his life, one can imagine Pershing in his later years. Perhaps he was sitting by a window, the late afternoon sun glinting off rows of medals that commemorated battles fought on multiple continents. Maybe he heard the echoes of artillery from decades past, saw the faces of the soldiers he commanded, and felt the love for a family taken from him too soon. One might hope that in those quiet moments he found a measure of peace, knowing he had done his duty as best he could under the relentless demands of war and destiny. For John J. Pershing, that might have been the final victory, to accept the weight of command with all its triumphs and tragedies, and to remind future generations that real leadership often comes at a price only the leader himself can fully comprehend.